Hello everyone, it's Miss Saul, Head of English at King Alfred's Academy here again for the second lesson of this week on writing a comparative analysis. If you remember, we are studying the Power and Conflict poetry. So today we're going to be looking at how to compare two of the poems that we've been studying. The first lesson talked you through how to write a detailed analysis of Exposure, which is the first poem we're going to use for our comparison. And this lesson is going to then talk you through how to write about the second poem, which was Bayonet Charge, and how to write comparatively about the two. If you remember, last lesson, you created a Venn diagram outlining any similar and contrasting ideas expressed in the poems Exposure and Bayonet Charge regarding the effect of conflict. That's the theme we were looking at. So it would be really useful to have your Venn diagram that you drew last lesson in the first video in front of you, because then you can refer to your notes about Bayonet Charge as well as Exposure. So you might want to pause this video for a second to go and find those notes if you don't already have them in front of you, as it will be very, very helpful for this lesson. You also wrote a detailed analytical paragraph using the ingredients of Squiced about one idea expressed in Exposure regarding the effects of conflict. So we've already written about Exposure. If you remember, it looked something like this in the corner. This was my version. It would also be very, very useful to have that paragraph that you wrote in lesson 1 in front of you for this lesson, as it's going to link to what we're doing today. So again, if you need to pause and go and find that, please do before we carry on. In this lesson, we are going to write an analysis using Squiced again about a similar or contrasting idea expressed in Bayonet Charge, again about the effects of conflict. And this is where your Venn diagram is going to come in useful. You've already got some notes about the ideas expressed in Bayonet Charge, so that will help you to select which one you want to use as the comparison. Okay, so you might want to pick a similar idea that's expressed in Bayonet Charge as was expressed in Exposure, the one you talked about, or you might find a contrasting one that's somewhat linked but says a different thing. Okay, so that's what we're going to do, and whilst we do that, you will learn how to write comparatively about both poems and both poets, demonstrating your understanding of how and why the ideas being expressed are similar or contrasting, different. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through how to do that step by step as we go. Just as a reminder, we're going to need to use the ingredients of Squiced again to write detailed analysis. So here is a reminder of what the S, Q and I of Squiced stands for. I'm not going to talk you through this again. I did this in the first video and I have done this before, but by all means, if you want to pause this slide and the next to just reread in your own pace what each part of Squiced helps you to show your reader, please do. That's absolutely fine. So SQI is on this slide, and CED is on this slide. So you can by all means rewind the video, pause it, read through it, and then move on when you're ready. But these are the same ingredients that we've used for other analytical paragraphs. This is the same ingredients we're going to use today whilst we write the second part of our comparative analysis as well, mostly about Bayonet Charge. So we're going to now look at the second step of how to write a comparative analysis. We've got our analytical paragraph about Exposure, but now we need to write the comparative analysis that goes with that, writing a detailed analytical paragraph about the ideas expressed in Bayonet Charge and explaining how these are similar or in contrast to the idea you've already written about in Exposure. In this, you'll need to make clear in your statement, and I'm going to talk you through how to do that in a second, whether the idea you're writing about is similar or in contrast to the idea you've already written about in the first poem, in Exposure, which is why you need to have your analytical paragraph about Exposure in front of you so you can see what you said in the statement. You also need to try and link to how the implied ideas and effects in Bayonet Charge, which you'll discuss in your inference and your connotations and your effects part of Squiced, are either similar or different to those you've talked about in the first poem, in Exposure. But again, don't worry about that for now. I'm going to talk you through that step by step when we get to those parts of our analytical paragraph. So no need to worry about that at the moment. Okay, so this is what we're going to be doing in today's lesson. So this first bit's relatively familiar. It's relatively the same as when we wrote about exposure. We're going to write a statement about bayonet charge this time, and it's still going to be about the effect of conflict. The only difference is that we're going to make a slight nod, if you like, to exposure. We're going to say that either the idea, the claim that we're making in our statement about bayonet charge is similar to the one we've made about exposure, or it's different. So in my case, I've made a similar claim. Okay, so I've started with the connective similarly, okay, meaning in the same way, okay, and then I'm going to go on to my statement. So I start with similarly, but if you're making a different contrasting point, you might start with in contrast, okay. So similarly, in his poem Bayonet Charge, so naming the poem as always, Hughes, naming the poet as always, also suggests that soldiers often no longer feel the sense of purpose they once had before arriving on the battlefield. Okay, so I've then made a clear claim regarding what the poem is suggesting, just as always. Okay, I've then added on to the end, just again to reinforce how it's similar to exposure. I've said, like Owen, so he's the poet that wrote exposure, if you remember. Like Owen, he also hints at the soldier's sense of futility during conflict. I'm saying he's hinting at the same idea. And if you remember, futility means the feeling that something is pointless, it doesn't change or achieve anything. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is pause this video, and I'd like you to write a new statement about another idea, not the same idea I've done, but a different idea that Hughes is presenting in Bayonet Charge about the effect of conflict. So you can use your Venn diagram to help you select the idea that you're going to talk about. Remember that this idea does need to either be very similar to the one you've talked about in exposure, or it can be something that contrasts the one that you've talked about in exposure. So something that offers a different viewpoint around the same topic, if you like. Don't forget, once you've written your statement about Bayonet Charge, to just reread it and check that it makes sense as a whole when you've finished. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to pause, to write, and then to join me again afterwards on the next slide. Okay, so we've got our statement about Bayonet Charge, and as normal, we then need to back it up with a quotation section. And this isn't different from any other detailed analytical paragraph. So there's no difference here. It's just literally saying this is implied when the poet states this, or has the speaker state this, and then explain when and why it was said, giving the context of what was going on in the poem when this line was said. So as always, you're going to start with a clear sentence stem. This is implied, or this is suggested when. You're going to embed your quote in your sentence. Don't forget your quotation marks. And then you're going to finally explain what happened just before, at the same time, or just after in the poem to show you fully understand why that line was being said in the poem at that time. Okay, so in my quotation section, I've got, this is implied when Hughes states the soldier in the poem was listening between his footfalls for the reason of his still running as he charged across the battlefield, which dazzled with rifle fire. Okay, so no surprise, I'm going to ask you to pause and write a new quotation section that supports the statement you've just written about Bayonet Charge. And don't forget that once you've written it, to reread it and check that it makes sense as a whole sentence. So pause, write, and then join me on the next slide in just a minute. Now we're on to the inference part for Bayonet Charge. And again, this is no different than the process of writing the inference for any detailed analytical paragraph. So you are going to firstly start by explaining the image the quotation that you've just provided creates in your head, what it makes you picture. Then you're going to explain what this hints at or is suggesting, which has made you make the claim that you've given in your statement. And then finally, you're going to explain briefly what it is the poet's demonstrating about the effect of conflict here, linking back to your statement. So mine reads, this creates an image of the soldier no longer understanding why he is continuing to fight as he runs across the battlefield. He no longer remembers why it was important, or even if there was any real point to it all, as it now simply seems chaotic and senseless. And if you remember, chaotic means there's no order or purpose to it. It's a mess. And senseless just means it's foolish and without meaning. Okay, there's no, again, it's no point really. Okay, so no surprise. If I could ask you to pause this video now, and I'd like you to write your new inference section that explains the quote you've just provided. Okay, so you're explaining your quote, and then making sure that once you've written it, that you proofread it to check it all makes sense. Okay, so pause, write your inference, and then join me again in just a moment for the next slide. We're halfway there, guys. Well done. Next up is connotations. This is where we look at our individual words. And again, for most of this, there's no different to a normal detailed analytical paragraph. We're looking at a particular word in the quote you've provided, and then we're going to explain what that implies or connotes, what ideas do we associate with it that's relevant, that is obviously showing us ideas about the effects of conflict on soldiers. So we're going to start by picking out a particular word that you think implies an important or relevant idea, trying to identify that word type. So for me, I've put in particular the noun reason. Okay, so I've picked out that word from my quote. Next, you're going to explain the relevant ideas that you link and associate with that word that helps you to further prove your statement. So what relevant ideas does this word make you think of that shows you the effects of conflict? And if you can, you're going to then go on to talk about other keywords or techniques used in the quotation you've provided that also provide relevant ideas too. So I've written, in particular, the noun reason connotes the idea that the soldier feels there should be a purpose to his sacrifice. He thinks there should be a reason, right? That his physical and psychological suffering and potential death needs to be justified. There needs to be a good reason for it, basically. However, the fact he is listening for this purpose and justification suggests he does not know or can no longer remember why he is there, as it now all feels pointless and absurd. So absurd means ridiculous, silly. Okay, so that's what I've done. I've done my first 3 stages. As you can see, there's a bold bit at the bottom. All right, and this bold bit is where I link back to exposure and how this is either similar or different to the ideas being expressed in exposure. So I've linked back and said that what is being implied in the second poem is similar to what's being implied in the first poem, and then I've explained how and why they are similar. If you've got contrasting ideas, you just explain that they're different, and then you'd explain how and why they're different. So I've put, this directly links to the ideas expressed by Owen when the speaker in exposure asks, what are we doing here? Again, suggesting that the soldiers did not understand why they had been put in this awful situation or how it could be justified. So I'm just adding on a link back to the first poem at the end of my connotation, if that makes sense. All right. So that's what I'm going to ask you to try and do now in your connotation section. I'm going to ask you to pause this video, and I'm going to ask you to write a new connotation section, looking at a particular word or more than one word if you can from the quote you've provided, and explain the relevant ideas it implies. Making sure that at the end, once you've done your explaining, you say how it links or contrasts with the ideas that Owen expressed that you talked about in your first analytical paragraph. Okay, so have mine on the screen as an example to help you out with that. Remember, don't forget to reread it once you've finished writing to check it all makes sense. I will put for you here the noun, adjective, verb and adverb definitions to help you try and decide what kind of word you've picked out. By all means, rewind this video slightly if you want to get rid of that so that you can see my waggle connotation section in full, so you understand what I've done. So have a go, pause this, and then when you finish writing your connotation, join me again on the next slide and we'll go on to the effects. We're almost there, guys. The development's very short in this second part, so we've not got lots left to do. Keep going and I'll see you on the next slide. Okay, so effects. This is where we're going to explain in more detail the bigger ideas the writer of Bayonet Charge, Ted Hughes, is trying to have on us. But this is a great opportunity where we can actually compare the effects. Are they both having the same effect on us? Are they having different effects on us? What was their aim, basically? So I'm going to start by first explaining what the keywords in the quote as a whole was designed to make me think and feel. Okay, it was designed to create a sense of a particular feeling. But I'm going to start that phrase by either saying it's like Owen or it's in contrast to Owen. Okay, so my points are similar, so I'm going to start with like Owen. I'm then going to say that Hughes, the second poet, does this to create a sense of, and in this case, he wanted to create a feeling of futility. Okay, so that's my claim. It's designed to create a sense of futility, as was the aim of Owen. The soldier evidently, so just another word for clearly, the soldier evidently feels confused and without purpose on the battlefield. He, like the speaker in exposure, so I'm again showing how they're similar, no longer understands or remembers if there is a point to his being there. This makes the reader also question the justification for sending soldiers into conflict, especially considering the effect it has on them, which was the aim of both poets. Okay, so I'm sort of making clear that I understand the aim of both poets, either that they were the same aim or they were slightly different if I was doing a contrasting point. So I've gone on to explain how the poets managed to create this idea and feeling, and then I've shown that I've understood what it is the poet's intending us to conclude and feel about this theme, in this case, about the effect of conflict. Okay, and I'm ensuring that I've linked my original statement, my original statement, and I've also explained how it links or contrasts with the ideas in the first poem. So this is where your comparison is coming in, all right? So I'm going to suggest that you definitely have this in front of you to use as a guide, but I'm going to ask you to pause this video again, and I'm going to ask you to have a go at writing a new effects section. And in this section, you're going to explain what the poet is trying to make us think and feel in Bayonet Charge. But then you're also going to try and do, as I've done, you're going to try and say whether it's similar to Owen, whether it's different to Owen, and what the aim of Hughes was in Bayonet Charge compared to what the aim of Owen was in Exposure. So it might be that they have the same aims. It might be that you think they have slightly different aims to show us. Okay, so pause, have a go at writing your effects, and then we're very nearly done. And I will join you on the second to last slide where we finish our paragraph with the development section. So pause, write, and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, finally, the development section. Now, in a normal, detailed, analytical paragraph, the development section would give you the chance to either provide secondary evidence in the form of a new quote to support your first quote, or you'd explain any relevant additional secondary ideas that your first quote is presenting. However, in a comparative analysis, you have actually written quite a lot about a lot of quotes at this point, and you've shown how the second poem is similar or different to the first poem. So actually, the development section at the end of your comparative analysis simply needs to be a conclusion almost of what it is that's clear that you've worked out that Owen and Hughes are demonstrating. And it might be that they're both demonstrating the same thing, or it might be that they're both contrasting what they're demonstrating, that one is saying this, but one is subtly saying something different. They're saying this instead. So I've stated what it is the poets are both clearly demonstrating, okay? And I'm just remembering that all of this needs to make sure that it does tie in with my original statements about exposure and Bayonet Charge. So you'll see right at the bottom of this slide, I have put my original statement about exposure, that Owen suggests soldiers feel that actions are futile during conflict. What they do makes no difference. And my original statement about Bayonet Charge. Hughes also suggests that soldiers often no longer feel the sense of purpose they once had before they arrived on the battlefield. And like Owen, he hints that soldiers have a sense of futility. Okay, so I just want to make sure that my concluding sentence in my development section of this doesn't contradict that, I guess, doesn't go against it. So I've said, therefore, it is clear that both Owen and Hughes are demonstrating that conflict causes soldiers to question their purpose and the justification for them being sent to war. That is the overall effect that they want to communicate to us. All right, it's quite a nice and simple sentence at the end, just to conclude. Therefore, it's clear that Owen and Hughes are either showing this and this, or showing the same thing, and here is what it is. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to pause for the last time, and I'm going to ask you to have a go at writing this final development section that explains what it is the poets are both demonstrating. Okay, once you've written your sentence, don't forget to reread it and check it makes sense as a whole, and then I will meet you when you've finished your written work on the last slide to tell you what you need to do with it. Okay, so pause, write, and I'll see you in a second. So we've now created a successful comparative analysis. And how we've done that is we have started with a detailed analytical paragraph about the first poem we wanted to talk about. We started about writing about exposure. So we said, or I said in my version, in his poem Exposure, Owen suggests that soldiers feel their actions are futile during conflict. What they do makes no difference. This is implied when the speaker states, but nothing happens when he reflects on the days spent in the trenches. This creates an image of the speaker and his fellow soldiers sat in the exposed trenches, feeling like they are slowly dying for no purpose, as nothing seems to be changing. They feel that their deaths will not help the war effort, and therefore the poet's clearly showing that their sacrifices are meaningless. In particular, the noun nothing connotes the idea that their presence and actions on the battlefield and in the trenches has no impact, for it does not change a single thing about their situation or the war itself. It also implies that their actions have no value. What they do is nothing in the grand scheme of things. This idea is further emphasised when Owen uses this line as a refrain in the poem to suggest that this is something they strongly and constantly feel. This is designed to convey the idea that conflict feels senseless and is a pointless waste of life. The speaker clearly feels disillusioned towards both the idea that he can make a difference and that there is a purpose to his dying in the trenches. This idea is further supported when the speaker asks the rhetorical question, "What are we doing here?" after commenting that the war seems to be rumbling on in the distance regardless of their presence. Through this question, the poet once again emphasises the doubt the soldiers feel in terms of the impact they are having and the purpose of their sacrifice. He is demonstrating their feelings of futility and hopelessness that comes about as a result of conflict. We then go on to a second detailed and analytical paragraph about the second poem, Bayonet Charge, but in this one, we have compared these ideas with those explored in the first poem. So whatever ideas we talked about in the first paragraph, we are now comparing to the ideas we're talking about in the second paragraph. So mine reads, similarly, in his poem Bayonet Charge, Hughes also suggests that soldiers often no longer feel the sense of purpose they once had before arriving on the battlefield. Like Owen, he also hints at the soldier's sense of futility during conflict. This is implied when Hughes states the soldier in the poem was listening between his footfalls for the reason of his still running, as he charged across the battlefield which dazzled with rifle fire. This creates an image of the soldier no longer understanding why he is continuing to fight as he runs across the battlefield. He no longer remembers why it was important, or even if there was any real point to it all, as it now simply seems chaotic and senseless. In particular, the noun reason connotes the idea that the soldier feels there should be a purpose to his sacrifice, that his physical and psychological suffering and potential death needs to be justified. However, the fact that he is listening for this purpose and justification suggests he does not know or can no longer remember why he is there, as it now all feels pointless and absurd. This directly links to the ideas expressed by Owen when the speaker in Exposure asks, "What are we doing here?" Again, suggesting that the soldiers did not understand why they had been put in this awful situation or how it could be justified. Like Owen, Hughes does this to create a sense of futility. The soldier evidently feels confused and without purpose on the battlefield. He, like the speaker in Exposure, no longer understands or remembers if there is a point to his being there. This makes the reader also question the justification for sending soldiers into conflict, especially considering the effect it has on them, which was the aim of both poets. Therefore, it is clear that both Owen and Hughes are demonstrating that conflict causes soldiers to question their purpose and the justification for them being sent to war. And that's that. That is the main skill that you need for your English Literature GCSE question on the power and conflict poetry, how to compare ideas between two poems. So you're done. You've worked really hard. Step 2 is now complete. You have now got a detailed comparative analysis of ideas expressed in exposure and bayonet charge regarding the effects of conflict. Well done, guys. It's not the easiest thing, but you have worked through it, and I'm really, really pleased for you. What I'd like you to do now is to ensure that you submit the entire comparative analysis, both about exposure and bayonet charge, to your teacher via Show My Homework, so that he or she can give you feedback and definitely give you the recognition you deserve for ploughing on through this and getting there. So well done. It can be submitted as a JPEG, as a photo. If you've handwritten it, you can take a photo with your phone or similar and upload that. Or if you've typed it on Word, you can upload that document directly. We really look forward to reading all of your ideas and what you've written. Well done, guys, again, for your hard work. And until next time, take care, and I'll see you again soon.